Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Buy Mageddon. It is week 14 of the NFL season, and quite honestly, fantasy playoffs might even be starting for some of you, and we've got 6 teams on a bye this week. It makes no sense to me. It makes absolutely no sense that the NFL decided to wait until week 14 to put 6 teams on a bye. So really at this point, all I can do is put on a brave face for you guys. We're screwed. We are screwed. Well, maybe not. If you've got a really good team and you aren't really going to be missing anybody this week, you're probably all right. But if you're dealing with injuries, which we had quite a bit this past week, if you're dealing with buys, if you're dealing with ineffective players, week 14 could be a big struggle for you. And we're going to try and find some guys on the waiver wire this week that may be able to help you out. Hit the like button for me, subscribe if you're new here, and let's jump into it. We're going to kick it off with running backs. And James Cook is going to be first off. Now, keep in mind that if you look at the outcome of the game, that a majority of James Cook's production came when the Bills were already up by a couple of scores. He was really used a lot later on in the game. Now, Devin Singletary, kind of that last drive, came back in and got a few touches. But James Cook, if you look at like 2 of the last 3 drives of the game, that is when he was getting the most touches. So is it that he's taking over for Singletary? I don't think so. Should you own James Cook? Maybe, especially in a game like the New York Jets, when you're going to have trouble on the outside, when you guys are, you're going to have Stephon Diggs and Sauce Gardner. Sauce Gardner did, in my opinion, a pretty decent job this week going up against Justin Jefferson quite a bit. The Jets defense as a whole has just been really good against the pass. We might need a few dump off the James Cook to get through this week for the Buffalo Bills. So should you own him? Yeah, probably. Should you be reliant on him? If you're thinking like RB2 numbers, you might be mistaken, all right? So don't think anything along those lines. I don't think he's taking over for Devin Singletary, but I do think he could be useful the rest of the season. Mike Boone for Denver going up against Kansas City. He's back from the IR. Latavius Murray really hasn't done anything to take over that backfield. I mean, they got rid of Melvin Gordon. I mean, they're relying on Latavius Murray at this point, and Mike Boone is kind of a backup at this, that you're looking at, that could help out. Latavius Murray hasn't done anything. He's not taking over the backfield. He's not putting up huge fantasy numbers. There's really no reason to stick with Latavius Murray if they don't want to. Mike Boone, as he gets a little bit more healthy, we could see him get a few more touches as well. If you're a Latavius Murray owner, maybe Mike Boone should be stashed as well. Now, are we stashing Mike Boone this week? Maybe not. You could probably let him go by and you could not even use a waiver wire pick on him. He'll probably still end up being there. So be cautious with it. We're not picking him up to start him right away, but he is a guy to keep an eye on. Zonovan Knight. Now, he is a guy that we could probably start right away, but the problem is it depends on Michael Carter and whether or not he would be ready for Buffalo this week. But on the flip side of that is if Michael Carter isn't ready for Buffalo either, Ty Johnson also becomes an appealing option. Now, with Zonovan Knight, he led the team with 15 carries, had 90 yards on the ground, and he also added 5 targets. So if you were going to go with anybody this week, it'd be Zonovan Knight. Ty Johnson is interesting, though, because in a PPR league, he saw 7 targets last week. He's not going to do much on the ground. He's probably not going to score a rushing touchdown. But going up against Buffalo again, a team that's, going to be maybe a little bit more tough for the New York Jets and Mike White to move the football on. Ty Johnson's a guy that if there's no Michael Carter, 7, 8, 9 targets is completely realistic. And if he catches 7, 8, 9 of those targets in a PPR league, he's going to be darn close to 10 fantasy points and giving you a startable day. Keep an eye on that this week. DJ Dallas is going to be my Fantrax first up this week. Now, as of this recording, we don't know the severity of Kenneth Walker's ankle injury. We know that obviously he left the game and didn't return. So first man up is going to be DJ Dallas. And he gets an okay matchup. Carolina has been ripped apart by the run at points this season. They also have been pretty decent this season as well. Now, am I grabbing DJ Dallas to start him as my RB2, hoping he gives RB1 production? No, absolutely not happening. But going up against Carolina, it's realistic to say, hey, give me 70 to 80 yards and fingers crossed for a touchdown. That's going to put us right in that again. 7 to 10 fantasy points without a touchdown. With a touchdown, we're going to go over that. More for me, maybe a flex option. But the reason that he's first up is because there's so many of you out there right now that are reliant on Kenneth Walker. And I know that because there are so many of you that are like, hey, when Kenneth Walker was a guy that we owned, we talked about him with you guys. He was a guy in your draft guide that you had listed. So we've held Kenneth Walker all this. So I know there's a lot of fantasy owners out there that have been watching our channel that own Kenneth Walker. And if you own Kenneth Walker, DJ Dallas is a guy that you're going to have to grab right away if he misses, because he'll be the first guy up and the one that you'll probably have to throw into your lineup if you don't have a lot of depth behind him. Jordan Mason for San Francisco. Now, he didn't do anything this past week, but I think the one thing that we have to keep an eye on maybe is not what Jordan Mason didn't do, but what Deebo Samuel didn't do. Deebo Samuel only had 4 carries. He averaged like 1.5 yards per carry. Jordan Mason had more carries than Deebo Samuel this week, so they weren't even utilizing Deebo in the backfield the same way we saw last year. Now, CMC, he still saw a majority of the carries, which is absolutely fine. But for CMC owners out there, you need to grab Jordan Mason. We know that CMC is already dealing with a knee that's bothering him at this point. If he were to miss a game at all, Jordan Mason will be first up, and you are going to need to have him. Handcuff CMC. Do it, owners. You're going to want to make sure that you have that. Samaje Perine is going to be listed again. Joe Mixon, back-to-back weeks now that he's missed with that concussion. Maybe he'll be back this week. I'm not sure. Even if he is, will it be in some limited capacity? Do they try to keep Mixon healthy for the playoff run? We're going to have to keep an eye on that. Samaje Perine needs to be owned, though. And Dare Ogunbowale, okay? Now listen, Dare Alawala Bing Bong, as I like to call him around here, my man Dare, we're just keeping an eye on him because Dameon Pierce for like 3-4 weeks now has not been the same running back that he was earlier in the season. All right. The touches throughout the year, I do believe they're starting to get to him a little bit. And not only that, but Houston's just not in a position to run the football a whole lot. A lot of the concerns that we had prior to the season starting are now starting to surface here towards the back end. If you own Dameon Pierce, my guy Dare is going to be the one that you want to grab and hold on to. What about the wide receiver position? Well, we do actually have quite a few options at the wide receiver position. First and foremost, Odell Beckham Jr., it is expected that he will make a decision and potentially sign this week. So if you're going to grab Odell Beckham Jr., now is going to be your final minute to do it. You're probably not going to be getting him afterwards. Demarcus Robinson for Baltimore. They're going to be going up against Pittsburgh. Caught 7 of his 8 targets last week for 41 yards. This is a good matchup against Pittsburgh coming up. Let's grab Demarcus Robinson. Let's grab him and throw him out there. I think he's a wide receiver 3 play this week. DJ Chark, revenge game last week against his former team, the Jaguars, and it worked out great. Caught 5 of his 6 targets for 98 yards, and now he gets Minnesota this week, who is prone to some big plays to the wide receiver position. Keep an eye on DJ Chark this week as well. Nico Collins, if we don't have any Brandon Cooks, Collins is a guy that you could potentially rely on if you're missing people this week. He had 10 targets and a touchdown this last week. Now he has a very low floor, also a low ceiling, but there's going to be touchdown potential. Corey Davis for the New York Jets going up against Buffalo. He had 10 targets this past week against Minnesota. The Jets probably going to have to throw against Buffalo. Buffalo is a team that has been prone to some big days to passers and wide receivers this season. So for me, if you take a look at Corey Davis, he's kind of the number 2. I would start Corey Davis before I would even think of Elijah Moore, but before I would even think of Tyler Conklin. Corey Davis would kind of be that next man up. And if there is no Michael Carter, and maybe we don't see the type of targets to the running backs that we talked about a minute ago, Corey Davis probably benefits from them the most. Darius Slayton, tough matchup against Philadelphia. Don't love it this week, but another 90 receiving yards. Maybe you're not grabbing Darius Slayton to play this week for you, but you're going to want Darius Slayton for the playoff run. He's been very consistent. Yeah, not a whole lot of upside, granted, but he's been very consistent with his production so far over the last few weeks. Trent Sherfield for the Miami Dolphins. Jalen Waddle, he ended up getting banged up this past week, and how much time does he miss? Now, Sherfield didn't do a whole lot. He had a big touchdown grab, but we've seen him have some big touchdown grabs earlier in the season as well. He would be the wide receiver too. And honestly, I would look to Sherfield before I would look to Gesicki if you're thinking that those targets might be going to the tight end. I don't know if I'm going that far with it. Michael Gallup. Now, Gallup, I'm hesitant to add Michael Gallup here because since he came back in week 4, he hasn't produced one fantasy viable week. I think the most points he's had was 7.5 fantasy points. So he hasn't produced any fantasy viable weeks for you. He's coming off a big 2-touchdown performance. And oh, by the way, like I just mentioned, Odell Beckham Jr. is going to be signing somewhere. And Dallas is one of those teams that is kind of in the mix at this point. Michael Gallup, if you're going to be adding him, be careful with that addition. You're not going to be getting 2-touchdown performances. And if they do sign OBJ, that's going to be tough. Dalton Schultz this week did absolutely nothing, which we'll talk about when we come to tight ends in a minute. So Michael Gallup benefited from that, but that's not a trend. That is a one-off week, I believe, when you look at that situation. Treylon Burks, now he is in the concussion protocol as of right now, and after he got hit, he had to even leave the game. So no Treylon Burks is a little bit of an issue for the Tennessee offense. For those of you out there, though, that might be willing to risk it, knowing that he's in the concussion protocol, you could potentially still grab him, knowing that other owners in your league might be off of him right now. So you grab Treylon Burks at a little bit of a discount, especially if you're lower on the waiver priority. You might be able to add him up. Or you know what? He might even clear. Knowing that we don't know if he'll play this week, if he clears waivers, and he could be an addition that you throw and stash on your bench. He's playing very well right now, though. He is a guy that I would like to own. Hopefully he gets back sooner rather than later. Zay Jones, now he saw 7 more targets this past week. Unfortunately, he had a couple of bad drops that would have helped his production. I see him getting back on track against Tennessee this week. Isaiah McKenzie, Buffalo, going up against the New York Jets. Already talked about this. Obviously, the matchups on the outside for the New York Jets benefit them a little bit. Yes, Stephon Diggs is going to get his. Gabe Davis is going to have a very tough matchup. Isaiah McKenzie could be the main benefactor here and a guy that is open more times than not this coming week. Now for the tight end position, boom, absolutely nobody. Let me take a second to explain why. The tight end position sucks. That's really all there is to it. There was only 5 tight ends this past week that scored more than 10 fantasy points. There was only 8 tight ends that scored more than 8 fantasy points. And some of those big tight ends that we've been utilizing, like a Pat Freiermuth, he finished his tight end 6, but he didn't get the 10 fantasy points. Mark Andrews, he only finished his tight end 9. He didn't get the 8 fantasy points. What about Travis Kelce? Oh, well, Travis Kelce finished his tight end 12. Wasn't even close to 8 fantasy points. What about TJ Hawkinson? Been great since he went to Minnesota. Nope, tight end 14. Dalton Schultz, he scored 2 touchdowns. Nope. Tight end 17. Disaster. In fact, Dallas Goedert, who's been injured for several weeks now, is still in the top 6 tight ends this season. The reason I'm putting nobody here on this slide is because you're just going to have to wait for the start and sit video. Now, my start and sit video comes out Tuesday morning, so it should come out before your waivers process. If your waivers are processing on Monday night, that's a weird league. Stop it. Y'all knock it off. They should be processing at the earliest Tuesday evening. So keep an eye on the tight end show, because that's where I'll talk about maybe some different guys that you can stream this week if you need to. Now, the good news is that the teams that are on buys this week, we're not really relying on any of those tight ends. So we're not really going to be missing anybody. But if you're dealing with issues and you've been streaming tight ends for a while, you're just going to have to wait, because I'm not telling you to use a waiver priority on any tight end with how vulnerable the position is right now. We'll talk about that on Tuesday in the tight end video. What about the quarterbacks? I do have some quarterbacks for you. I've got 4 actually this week. 2 of them are in the same game, Tyler Huntley and Kenny Pickett. Definitely sounds like Lamar Jackson's going to be missing some time. Tyler Huntley, he's going to have a great matchup here, and we've seen his upside before. When he's coming for Lamar Jackson, we've seen him present some decent upside, and this is a good matchup for him to do it. Kenny Pickett, he hasn't thrown an interception in 4 straight games. Now, he doesn't have a very high ceiling right now. He only has 2 touchdowns in that time period, but I'll take, 150, 200 yards and maybe one touchdown. And hey, at least you didn't lose me the week by having an awful performance. Jared Goff going up against Minnesota this week. Jared Goff always plays better at home. We just saw that against Jacksonville. Minnesota gives up big plays to wide receivers. We just talked about that a minute ago, right? Going up against Detroit at Detroit. Now, I'm not saying Detroit's going to beat Minnesota this week, but I do see them being successful on offense. Keeping this game close. And if they keep it close enough for enough amount of time, we could find ourselves in a situation where Minnesota fans they're a little bit worried come the end of the game. Minnesota might end up pulling it out, but I think Detroit makes it interesting. Ryan Tannehill going up against Jacksonville. Just mentioned it a minute ago. They just got destroyed by Jared Goff and the Detroit Lions. Now, Treylon Burks being back will be a big component of this, and whether or not Ryan Tannehill has maybe a little bit more upside. But again, just like I mentioned with Kenny Pickett a second ago, it's a safe floor. He probably won't lose you your week. Defensive special teams. Well, Raiders and Chiefs are the two that I'm going to be playing right now. The Raiders get the Rams. The Rams are a mess. They can't do anything, it feels like, on offense. Yeah, Cam Akers had a couple of touchdowns. Hey, good to see you, Cam Akers. But other than that, you don't really get anything from the LA Rams. The Kansas City Chiefs, they're going to get Denver. And what do I say? Denver blows, right? Denver blows. Their offense isn't any good. Russell Wilson isn't any good. Now, maybe in the future they will be. I'm not saying that this is the demise of the Denver Broncos, and I'm not saying that Russell Wilson's career is over. But I think what we've seen this year is what we get from Denver, and I that's who they are. We know who they are. We know who Denver is right now. They're not going to surprise us the rest of the season. Players to drop. Nobody again. Why? Because we've got 6 teams on a bye. If you're missing players, you're probably not going to be dropping too many guys. So like I've done in a few times before with this show, leave me a comment down below. If you've got to drop somebody to add somebody else, let me know who you're dropping, who you're adding. Keep your comment short and sweet. Dropping player X, adding player Y, and I will respond either yes or no. And I'll get to as many as I can over the next couple of days. Hopefully that helps you out a little bit. I don't want to do a broad blanket, just drop this guy, because again, when we're dealing with injuries and we're dealing with a lot of bye weeks, we might need to rely on some guys that, yeah, I tell you to drop them, but you don't have anyone better on your waiver wire anyway to pick up. And I don't want to put you in a situation where you just blindly listen to it and it doesn't fit your team well. So let me know down in the comments. But hey, if you're new here, you got to subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button before you leave for me. Appreciate everybody tuning in to this week's Waiver Wire show. Stay tuned for the rest. Again, lots of buys. You need to check out the rest of the content this week. But I'm going to get out of here. Peace out. Stay safe and healthy. And I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.